They toasted Aya's birthday with overpriced champagne at my restaurant without realizing I was the one who built it. Names Birch Endicott. 71 ex-chef, ex-husband, part-time ghost in my own family. The chipped coffee mug in my hand was still warm. The crack hadn't spread yet. Ever felt invisible at your own table? Tell me, would you have walked out or walked in? This morning, the coffee tasted like cardboard. I'd brewed it the same way I had for years. 2 scoops, no sugar, but something about it was off. Or maybe it was just me. The silence in the apartment stretched long and heavy, curling into the corners like a stubborn fog. I sat at the small kitchen table, chipped mug in hand, and listened to the cicadas screaming outside as if they had something urgent to say. My apartment sat above Virginia's table, the restaurant I built with my wife before cancer took her, and time finished the job. These walls had once echoed with the clatter of prep work and her easy laugh drifting up from the kitchen. Now they just echoed. I rinsed my mug and placed it in the rack, careful not to knock it against anything. The hairline crack along its side had been growing longer lately, like a fault line creeping across a map. Still, I refused to throw it out. Not everything broken needed to be discarded. The morning light filtered through the old linen curtains, catching dust motes midair. I moved slowly, methodically, as I always did, opening the windows, checking the ledger, marking down the Tuesday deliveries. The restaurant wouldn't open for another 5 hours, but habit had its own demands. By 7:15, I'd already eaten 1 slice of toast, a soft boiled egg, and a single pat of butter. Virginia's breakfast. The way she used to make it when we had 15 minutes together before staff arrived. I didn't particularly like soft-boiled eggs, but they reminded me of her, and that was enough. I reached for the small velvet box on the counter. Inside it lay the pearl brooch, a delicate curve of silver, with 3 clustered pearls like teardrops. It was one of the few things Virginia had loved, but never worn often. Too fine for a cook's apron, she used to say. I wrapped it carefully in one of her scarves, blue silk, faintly smelling of lavender and salt air. Folding it took time. My fingers didn't move as quickly as they once had, and something about wrapping that brooch made my hands feel heavier. It was meant for Aya, my granddaughter. She turned 22 today. I hadn't seen her in months, not properly. There were the quick hellos at family functions, a polite thank you note last Christmas for the book on Southern heirloom vegetables, but nothing real. Merritt, her mother, my daughter, had built a fine fortress between us. I wasn't sure if Aya had helped build it, or was just another of its residents. A photo on the wall caught my eye. Virginia barefoot in the backyard, laughing with a toddler-aged Merritt on her hip. It was sun-faded, the edges curled from heat and time, but the joy in it remained intact. I often looked at that picture when I needed to remember what it had once felt like to be chosen to be part of someone's center. My laptop dinged. An email. I opened it slowly, already knowing who it was from. Subject: a reminder, Aya's party. From Merritt Endicott message. You're expected at Aya's party, 6 p.m. sharp. That was it. No dear dad. No signature, no warmth. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Expected, as if my presence were an obligation like valet parking or cocktail napkins. Still, I supposed it was an invitation of sorts. I hovered my fingers over the keyboard. For a second, they trembled. Maybe it was age, maybe not. I typed slowly, choosing each letter like I was threading a needle. Reply: I'll be there. Simple, non-confrontational, just like Merritt liked things. I shut the laptop and exhaled through my nose. I hadn't been to their house in almost a year. Not since the barbecue where Fletcher Merritt's husband cornered me about franchising the restaurant like I owed him access to it. I didn't want to dredge up those memories, but this was Aya. Virginia would have gone. She would have told me to go. I walked to the coat rack and pulled my summer blazer off the hook. It still smelled faintly of wood smoke and time, leftovers from an evening long past. I slipped the wrapped brooch into the inside pocket, resting my palm against the lump to make sure it sat flat. As I opened the door, a gust of warm air rolled in heavy with humidity and the metallic scent of rain waiting just beyond the horizon. I paused in the doorway, one hand on the frame. "You'd want me to go, Ginny, wouldn't you?" I murmured. I wasn't sure if I believed the answer I imagined, but I stepped out anyway. By 10 a.m., I'd already repolished my shoes twice. Old leather stiff at the toes, but still shined up well if you took your time and used enough elbow grease. I don't think anyone would notice, not really, but I noticed. Some habits never died even when the people they were for had. Downstairs, the kitchen buzzed with the low hum of prep work. The sound of knives chopping rhythmically against cutting boards. Timers ticking toward readiness. Pans clinking into place like well-trained soldiers falling in line. It brought comfort. Noise with purpose always did. I slipped through the side stairwell and stepped into the kitchen. No announcement, no speech. Just a quiet nod to Maria as she diced shallots and a tap on the counter near Casey, who was assembling citrus garnishes. No one asked questions. They didn't need to. Rowan caught my eye immediately. He was double-checking a reservation list, lips pursed the way they always were when he was concentrating. Sharp always. Never missed a detail. That's why Virginia trusted him. That's why I still did. He walked over, lowering his voice, even though the kitchen was our domain. "The party's under the Waterstone Group," he said, tapping the clipboard. "Booked through a corporate concierge Fletcher's doing, I'm guessing." I nodded once. "You sure you want this?" he asked. "Could assign the table to me. You wouldn't have to be in the room." I looked at him. Rowan didn't press. That was the thing I appreciated most about him. He asked the hard questions once, never twice. "I need to see it through," I said, then added. "But not as myself. Just as the guy who runs the back of house." Rowan gave a half smile and shook his head. Right. The invisible man in his own kitchen. Got it. We both knew the absurdity of it. That Fletcher, with all his bravado and arrogance, would throw his daughter's birthday party at my restaurant, probably not even realizing the layers of irony involved. Or maybe he did. With Fletcher, it was hard to tell where the oblivious ended and the calculated began. As staff moved about, Rowan leaned closer again. They requested the garden room. Wanted to look elevated but unpretentious. His words, "You want me to modify anything?" "No," I said. "Let them have what they ordered. No frills, no changes. But make sure the linens are steamed and the silverware aligned." Virginia never stood for a crooked fork. He nodded and moved off, calling out instructions like a conductor, fine-tuning his orchestra. I walked slowly to the front dining area. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, laying a soft haze over the polished wood tables. I took a cloth from the hostess stand and stepped outside to polish the brass letters en front. On the restaurant sign. Virginia's table, it read. Still crisp, still proud, though time had dimmed its shine. I rubbed gently at the corners where grime liked to settle. Tourists passed behind me on the sidewalk, and I wondered if any of them knew what this place once was. What it had meant. I could still hear Merritt's voice from 10 years ago. "It's a bit too rustic, Dad. Maybe you could modernize it a little." That had been the beginning. The first real jab, not playful, not curious, but sharp. Back then, she still called me Dad. Now I was just you in her emails. I turned back inside and past the office, pausing when I saw the mail piled on the desk. A thick envelope from the HOA sat unopened. Fletcher's name in bold letters. I didn't touch it, but its presence burned like a thorn against the side of my vision. Virginia would have laughed at all this, or maybe she wouldn't have. Maybe she would have cried and never told me. I made my way to the wine cellar. Cool air met me as I descended the narrow steps. The smell of cork and oak and old stone brought a strange peace, like entering a chapel, built not for prayer, but for preservation. I ran my fingers along the bottles familiar with each label, each vintage. Toward the back, covered in a soft film of dust, I found what I'd come for, a 1997 Merlot. Virginia's favorite, a bottle we'd kept for some special day that never came. I carried it up and placed it gently on the preparation table near the service entrance to the garden room. No one else noticed. As I was about to return to the kitchen, Rowan reappeared, wiping his hands on a towel. "You still haven't told me why you're letting them celebrate here, after everything." I paused fingers, brushing the stem of the wine glass. "Because I need to remember who they are," I said slowly. "Before I forget who I am." He said nothing after that, just nodded once and walked away. I turned toward the door to the basement again, something pulling me. I opened it, stepped inside the darkness for a moment longer, and exhaled. Upstairs, the cicadas had quieted, but inside I was still buzzing. The diner still smelled like burnt bacon and broken dreams, and I loved it for that. The cracked red booths, the sticky, laminated menus, the single, overworked waitress with a beehive of a bun, and a voice like gravel soaked in honey. None of it had changed since I first wandered in here 30 years ago. And that was exactly the point. Some places didn't pretend. They just were. I took my usual spot-back booth near the window where the sun streamed in just enough to warm your shoulders, but not enough to blind you. Rowan slid in across from me, tugging off his hoodie and folding it neatly beside him. "Your back okay?" he asked, nodding to the vinyl seat. It squeaked as he shifted. "Does it look like it's okay?" I said, adjusting myself with a grimace. "These seats were made for teenagers and truckers." "I'm neither," he smirked but didn't reply. "That's Rowan," he lets the silence breathe. Virginia used to say he listened like someone raised around too much noise. He learned to wait for what mattered. Our waitress Carol ambled over with 2 glasses of water already in hand. "Same as always, Mr. E," she asked. "You know it." She turned to Rowan with a wink. "And he's finally brought his shadow. You want the same?" Rowan looked mildly amused. "I'll take what he's having." She scribbled something down that we both knew she didn't need to write, then shuffled off toward the kitchen. Outside, cars idled at the intersection windows, down the faint thump of bass leaking from somewhere across the street. Inside, the jazz station played something brushed and slow. Stan Getz, maybe. Rowan leaned back, exhaling. "So, crazy week. 3 servers quit. One's claiming they didn't get paid overtime." I sipped my water and raised an eyebrow. And I asked. I checked. They're right, kind of. Some missed logging out and Ramon didn't cross-check like he was supposed to. "Fix it," I said simply. I did. He looked away for a moment. "Also, our new walk-in supplier dropped us. Said we're too small volume. Want to go full digital next year?" I chuckled. "You're starting to sound like a CEO. He gave a half laugh. "Yeah, just with less hair and more existential dread." Carol returned with 2 Turkey Club sandwiches and a plate of fries. We didn't order, but wouldn't protest. The smell was perfect, greasy, sharp, and comforting. We ate quietly for a few minutes. I watched the way Rowan dissected his sandwich, clean, efficient, nothing wasted. His fingers were calloused but careful. He used to be a line cook years ago. He'd worked every station in my kitchen, once burned his hand trying to save a falling cast iron skillet. Now he managed payroll and scheduling like a conductor. "You ever regret not expanding?" he asked mid-chew. I blinked. "What?" he shrugged. "Virginia's table. You could have had 3-5 by now, even a chain. Your name's strong in the South. You'd be a brand." I looked down at my sandwich. "Let me tell you something," I said. "The first stove we ever bought for the place, Virginia paid for it out of her teacher's salary. $800, used. It ran uneven heat, made the biscuits crisp on one side and pale on the other." Rowan smiled faintly. "Sounds charming. She cried the first time we used it," I said. "Not because it was bad, but because we'd done it. Built something real. With our own damn hands." He was quiet. "I don't regret keeping it small," I added. "I regret not writing the recipes down sooner." Carol passed again and slipped a napkin under my plate. I noticed the faded VE stitched in one corner, one of Virginia's. She must have left it here years ago. I folded it absently, tucking it into my jacket pocket. Rowan wiped his mouth and leaned forward. "You think you'll run it forever?" I met his eyes. "I might not run Virginia's table forever." He blinked. His face didn't change, but something behind the eyes flickered, surprise maybe, or fear, hard to tell. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small iron key, dull from age, smooth at the edges. "Safe upstairs," I said, sliding it across the table. "Time you knew where the real recipes are. Not the laminated ones. The real ones." He didn't touch it at first, just stared. "You're serious?" I nodded. "That key's seen 3 hurricanes," I said. 1 kitchen fire, and a brief attempt by Merritt to organize the filing cabinet by color. He let out a quiet laugh, but his hand trembled slightly as he reached for the key. He closed his fingers around it like it might vanish. I checked my watch. I should get back. "Right," he said. "Party prep." I stood, grabbed my coat, and started toward the door. Just before I pushed it open, I glanced back. Rowan was still sitting there, staring at the key, his jaw tight. The sunlight hit him square in the face, and for a second he looked older than he was. I stepped outside into the summer heat. The car door creaked as I opened it. I slid in, adjusted the mirror, and caught one last look at him through the rear view. He hadn't moved. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I'd just handed over something heavier than any set of books or menu plans. When Fletcher walked into my restaurant wearing Italian loafers, an entitlement, I knew the act was about to begin. He moved like a man who thought the floor existed to catch his stride, swagger without pause, smile without weight. Behind him floated Merritt, chin-high, air-kissing the hostess like she was allergic to affection. Aya trailed last, small hands gripping the strap of a red purse, too grown up for her age. Her eyes wandered the space. They didn't recognize the smell of thyme baked into the baseboards. They didn't notice the piano jazz playing softly Virginia's favorite Coltrane tune. They certainly didn't notice me tucked quietly into the far corner near the bar, sipping lukewarm coffee from a mug that now bore 2 cracks instead of 1. Party of 8 for the Waterstone group. Fletcher announced to the host, puffing out his chest like he'd just presented credentials to enter a royal banquet. Right this way, Maria said smoothly, leading them to the best table in the house, my table. The one Virginia and I had sanded and lacquered ourselves. Table 7, centered under the antique chandelier we found in Savannah, the one with the slight tilt we never bothered fixing. Merritt turned her nose slightly. "Oh, it's cute," she said. "Sort of charming, like a museum exhibit." Fletcher laughed as he tugged back his chair. "Rustic chic. Not my usual scene, but it'll do." Aya said nothing, just looked around with a kind of nervous reverence. Her gaze drifted toward the walls. She lingered on the framed menu from our grand opening, then on the handwritten recipe mounted beside it, my biscuit dough scrawled in thick marker, the ink smudged from Virginia's hands years ago. Her eyes narrowed. Recognition bloomed, but she said nothing. The servers moved efficiently, presenting menus, pouring water, making no mention of me. That was by design. Rowan had briefed them thoroughly: act normal, offer excellence, and do not acknowledge Birch unless necessary. I caught Rowan in the hallway earlier where the kitchen meets the office. He'd shown me a message on his iPad. The subject line, "They won't see it coming," just those 6 words signed with an R. Now I sat with the chipped mug balanced between my hands, fingers tracing the new fracture running like a fault line from lip to base. I didn't blame Fletcher for bumping into me. I'd been standing near the end of the bar, ostensibly scanning the wine shelf, when he turned from the host's stand too fast. "Watch it, old-timer," he'd grunted, brushing coffee from his sleeve. "No harm done," I said, even as the heat seeped into my palm. He didn't even look at me long enough to register the face. Why would he? I wasn't wearing a name tag. I wasn't anybody. I returned to my seat, the crack in the mug catching the light. A jagged thread along a worn surface, familiar metaphor, sure. But when you live long enough, you realize life doesn't care if the metaphors are tired. They're true anyway. From my vantage point, I watched them order the most expensive bottle on the list, Cabernet Reserve 2014 California, like it proved something. Fletcher gestured big, throwing his arm over the back of Merritt's chair. She checked her phone between bites of complimentary sourdough. Aya sat still, small and serious, her napkin folded precisely in her lap. Her gaze kept returning to that framed recipe. I saw her lips move silently, mouthing a few words. It was my handwriting. I wondered if she remembered the way I'd shown her to measure flour, not by packing it, but by fluffing it first, letting it fall like snow. She stood suddenly, walked to the wall. Her fingers reached out, not quite touching the glass, but hovering. Our eyes met, just for a second. She almost said something. Then Merritt called her back, and Aya turned away, the moment dissolving like sugar in hot tea. I exhaled slowly, set the mug down. The crack had lengthened. Behind me, Rowan tapped my shoulder gently. "Kitchen's ready," he murmured. I nodded once, rose stiffly, and stepped into the pass line. The heat greeted me like an old friend, sharp, immediate, honest. I called the order loud enough for only the line to hear. "Service for table 7, fire now." The pans hissed, the ovens clicked, the dance began. I stepped out from the kitchen just as they lit the candle on Aya's cake. She sat still at the head of the table, framed in the warm light of the chandelier, a paper crown slightly askew on her dark curls. 8 candles flickered on a lemon lavender cake I'd baked that morning, Virginia's old recipe unchanged. The flame danced soft and uneven, casting gold over Aya's small, unsure smile. Rowan stood near the kitchen pass, arms folded, nodding once. It was time. I smoothed the front of my chef's coat, stiff faded a bit too snug around the shoulders, and stepped onto the dining floor like a ghost, walking through his old house. Fletcher was mid-toast. He raised his glass with a flourish that would have embarrassed even himself in another decade. To success, he said, eyes bright, and to finally leaving smallness behind. The table chuckled. Merritt clinked her glass against his with exaggerated grace, nearly knocking it over. Aya didn't raise hers. She was watching me. Had been, I think, from the moment I appeared. I stopped a few feet from the table behind Merritt's chair. "Happy birthday, Aya," I said softly. She blinked. The table went still. "I brought you something," I added, reaching into my coat pocket and drawing out the brooch, silver shaped like a leaf. Mother of pearl gleaming under the chandeliers. It was wrapped in Virginia's scarf. The folds careful, the scent of lavender faint. Aya looked down, then up again. She didn't move. Merritt leaned over and whispered too loudly. "You brought that old thing," Fletcher snorted. "Did you find that in a pawn shop?" Neither of them noticed how Aya's fingers reached slowly and accepted the bundle. She didn't unwrap it. She just held it palm flat like it was warm. I turned to the guest across from Fletcher, mid-40s, tan Rolex blinking. "I hope the sea bass is to your liking," I said. "It's my recipe." The man blinked, confused. "It's excellent. Wait, your recipe?" Before the silence could take over, Rowan stepped forward. "Calm, clear. This is Mr. Birch Endicott, owner and founder of Virginia's Table." A breath. A single collective intake. Like the moment before a thunderclap. Merritt turned to me, voice tight. "You own this," and nodded. "For 15 years. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Fletcher's face twisted. "Then why hide it?" The candle on the cake flickered again. No one moved to blow it out. I glanced at Aya, then at Merritt, then back to Fletcher. "Because I wasn't invited," I said simply. Nobody spoke. I let the moment sit. I've served thousands of meals under this roof. I continued adjusting the cuff of my coat, fed tired nurses, laid off dock workers, couples on first dates. Never once felt the need to introduce myself. I took a step closer. The floor creaked. But tonight I added I wanted to see the woman my granddaughter is becoming, even if it meant standing in the wings. Aya looked down at the brooch again. This time she unwrapped it, fingers delicate. Her mouth opened slightly. She turned it over in her hand as though confirming something she'd only dreamed. "That was your grandmother's," I said gently. "She wore it to your mother's graduation." Fletcher laughed once sharp. "This is what a stunt you." Waiting for applause, I turned to him. No, I was waiting for the right time. He stood up then, pushing the chair back with a scrape. "Right time for what? To guilt trip everyone, to play chef in your own pity play." Rowan moved, barely a shift of stance, a lean forward. But I shook my head. "I'm not angry," I said. I picked up the chipped mug from the bar, still half full, and held it up slightly. "I'm tired," I said, "but not angry." Merritt looked as if she wanted to disappear. Her fingers twitched toward her wineglass. Aya turned to her and whispered something we couldn't hear. Then she stood, walked over, and hugged me. Her arms wrapped tight around my ribs, face pressed into the old chef's coat. The brooch still in her hand poked gently against my back. I closed my eyes. My hands didn't rise at first. Then they did. When she stepped back, her eyes were damp. "Thank you," she said, "for coming." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The table stayed silent. I turned and walked back toward the kitchen, past stunned expressions and untouched dessert plates. Just before the swinging door closed behind me, I heard Fletcher's voice, low but sharp. "Why hide it?" I didn't flinch when Fletcher called me a fraud. I just sipped my tea. The room was smaller than it looked in the daytime. A private space behind the kitchen where we used to host rehearsal dinners and anniversary parties. Now it felt like a theater after the show, quiet, still smelling of applause and burned-out lights. Outside I could hear the muted clatter of dishes and the occasional laugh from a lingering table. But here inside the air was heavy with everything unsaid. Fletcher paced near the window, still holding his wine glass, like a prop he forgot to return. Merritt sat stiffly across from me, arms folded, jaw tight. Aya curled up beside her legs, swinging beneath the chair, eyes fixed on the middle of the table where Virginia's brooch. Her brooch now rested on the linen like a question. "You could have helped us," Merritt finally said. I looked at her not unkindly. "I did. You just never saw it," she scoffed. "You mean letting us drown in bills? In decisions we didn't know how to make?" "You insisted on sailing alone," I said. I respected that. Fletcher turned, his voice suddenly syrupy. "Look, we got off on the wrong foot. I didn't know you were well, you." "That makes two of us," I said. He smiled thinly, stepped forward. "But now that we're clear, there's an opportunity here." Merritt glanced sideways, uncertain. Fletcher set his glass down carefully, then reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a folded napkin with a scribbled note on the back of a receipt. "Picture this Virginia's table, but in every southern city. Streamlined branding, modern flair. We bring in investors, update the menu, go national." He slid the napkin across the table. "You'd be the face, the legacy. I'd handle the pitch." I didn't touch it. Instead, I let the silence stretch. Merritt's eyes flashed. "He's trying to help. We're not kids anymore. We need to think smart." I finally looked at the receipt. The ink was smudged. Something had been written, then scratched out. Above it, in new handwriting, a dollar figure. "Did you write this?" I asked Fletcher, "on a receipt for your meal here tonight." He blinked. "Well, paper's paper. You erased the itemized list." His fingers twitched. "It's not your hands shaking," I said. "Want some tea?" Rowan stepped into the room as if summoned by thought. He carried a simple tray, 2 ceramic cups, steam, rising gently. He placed one in front of me without a word. I lifted the cup, took a sip. The warmth settled in my throat like truth. "I'm not poor," I said. "I just didn't sell myself for approval." Fletcher leaned in. "We could still partner." "No," I said, not loudly but firmly. "Not ever." He straightened the mask, slipping slightly. "You talk about expansion," I continued, "but this place was never built to grow. It was built to hold." Merritt frowned. "Hold what grief? Joy. The smell of her biscuits on a rainy day. The sound of Aya's laugh when she was 3. Memories. You don't franchise that." No one replied. Aya reached across the table and picked up the brooch again. This time she pinned it gently to the collar of her cardigan. Her fingers were slow but sure. When she looked up, her gaze was clear. "I want his truth," she said softly. Merritt looked away. Fletcher's mouth opened, but whatever line he had prepared dissolved into the room's hush. I stood slowly, stretching my legs. "You're welcome to stay for dessert," I said. "But I think the kitchen's closing in 15. They didn't move. I nodded to Rowan. He gave a subtle nod in return, stepping aside to open the door. As I turned to leave, a small voice caught me. "Can I come tomorrow?" Aya asked. I paused. She stood, hands clasped in front of her. "I want to learn." I looked at her, really looked. The cardigan too big on her shoulders, the new old brooch catching the light, her eyes both brave and unsure. I nodded. "I'll be here," I said. She arrived at dawn, ponytail, sneakers, no makeup. I almost cried. I'd been chopping shallots in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the fridge, and the faint tick of the wall clock the only sounds. Morning light spilled through the wooden slats above the prep counter, slicing the room into warm rectangles. The air smelled like rosemary and lemon oil. Yesterday's work lingering like memory. Aya stood in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, an apron in her hands. "I wasn't sure what to wear," she said. I nodded toward the apron hooks near the walk-in. "That'll do." She changed without a word, then stepped beside me, washed her hands carefully, and reached for a cutting board. We worked side by side. I chopped slower than usual, letting her set the pace. Her hands moved cautiously at first, then more surely. She wiped the counter with the same small circles Virginia used to make. "I remember the smell," Aya said. "It's like home I didn't know I missed." Neither of us looked up. I handed her a bunch of basil. "We start with the sauce. No shortcuts. Only simmer," she said and smiled. I almost dropped the knife. Rowan poked his head in around 6:30, already in his usual pressed shirt and jeans. He watched us for a moment, said nothing, then stepped back out. The door swung quietly behind him. Aya stirred the pot, eyes fixed. I never asked where my scholarship came from. I raised an eyebrow. You didn't? I figured it was, I don't know, some anonymous foundation? I dried my hands, walked over to the office cabinet, and pulled out a folder. Inside was a printout of the email exchange, my name, her college, the transfer record. I handed it to her. She read it twice. You were always there, she said softly, even when I didn't know. I shrugged. Not always well, but yes. She folded the paper carefully like it might tear if rushed and slid it into her backpack. Then she went back to chopping parsley. The phone rang in the office. I answered, kept it short. Yes, please update it. Equal split. Aya and Rowan, thank you. I returned to the kitchen. Aya didn't look up, but I saw her shoulders tense just slightly, then release. Rowan came back in, carrying 2 fresh loaves from the back oven. He caught my eye and smiled, a slow, tired grin that said what we both knew. It was time. He placed the bread on the rack, nodded once at Aya, and then turned to me. I'll head to the market. I clapped his shoulder as he passed. Don't forget the honey. Never do. Then it was just me and her. She wiped her brow with the corner of her sleeve. What's next? Cleaning the slicer. Then eggs, she grinned. The Birch way. I shook my head. The Virginia way. After we finished the prep, she wandered toward the far drawers looking for cling wrap. I heard her pause. Still use this? She asked. She held up the chipped mug, my old coffee cup crack, running jagged across its side like a tired smile. I took it from her, turned it slowly in my hands. Every day, I said. They say you shouldn't glue broken things. I say then you never loved them. The mug sat on the counter, its familiar crack, now sealed with a line of gold glue that shimmered faintly in the morning light. Aya had done it herself carefully with a small kit she ordered online, the instructions still folded neatly in the drawer. I ran my thumb along the seam. It was warm. She slid a cup of coffee across the counter, black, no sugar. Just how I liked it. Still hot, she said. Like you taught me. Outside sunlight pooled across the worn wooden floors of Virginia's table. The doors had just opened. Early customers trickled in, retirees. A young couple holding hands, a mail carrier on break. The old bell above the entrance chimed soft and tinny. Rowan stepped in from the side office, 2 manila folders in hand. Birch, he said. Final versions. I had my lawyer look them over just in case. I nodded, opened the folder, and scanned the documents. Everything was where it should be. Co-ownership, equal authority, shared legacy. We signed in silence. Aya wiped down a counter, then grabbed the order pad and began jotting down the first reservations of the day. She carried herself differently now, shoulders back, movements confident. Her apron was dusted with flour and pride. Grandpa, she called, not looking up. Table 4, wants 2 lemon biscuits and a side of hash. I chuckled. Tell them they have excellent taste. She grinned and returned to the dining room. I lingered behind, pulled open the drawer below the register, and took out the old photograph. Virginia stood in the garden out back, hair tied with a scarf, holding a basket of tomatoes. Her smile wasn't posed, it was real, caught mid-laugh. I stared at it longer than I meant to. We did good, Ginny, I said quietly. I folded the photo back into the envelope and placed it gently beneath the counter. Aya came back behind the bar, brushing flour off her hands. She picked up the silver hair brooch still resting on a clean dish towel and pinned it to her apron strap without a word. The tablet near the register buzzed. I tapped the screen. 2 unread emails from Merit subject. About last week message I stopped reading, closed it, opened Fletcher's next. From Fletcher subject proposal, expansion opportunity message. I think we could. I archived it. Some things were better left unanswered. The bell rang again. A young boy ran in ahead of his parents, marveling at the dessert display. I recognized him from a week ago. He loved our cinnamon toast, extra crispy. Rowan greeted them, led them to a window table. Aya grabbed menus without being told. I sat at a table near the back wall for once, not standing or managing or correcting, just sitting, watching, breathing. The mug warmed my palms. The golden seam glinted. Aya passed by and touched my shoulder. Grandpa lunch rush is coming. I smiled. Let it come. The sunlight that morning poured across the wooden floors like honey, and the old mug now lined with gold sat quietly beside my hand. It didn't pretend it had never broken. It wore its scars like proof of having mattered. Sometimes we spend years chasing closure, only to find it waiting in the hands of those who stayed, not the ones who left. Love doesn't always come loud. It comes early, apron-dusted, with a good cup of coffee. We can't change what people refuse to see in us, but we can choose who we keep building with. Have you ever been handed a second chance wrapped in something small, like a crack sealed with care? Share your story below, or stay a while.